I'd rather read Who is an Addict.
Oh, I just be more fun. Just call Toby. And
Take it over his spot.
Okay, hello, my name is Rosie. I'm an addict. On behalf of the Cabin Fever Prevention Committee, we would like to thank you for coming and helping us to show that no addict need ever die from the horrors of addiction. The hotel has gone to great lengths to provide us with a clean and friendly space for our convention. We as participants need to act responsibly to ensure a welcome return in the future. The convention committee asks that you, 1, please bear in mind that your conduct is a direct reflection of NA. Please keep in mind that not everyone wants to stay up all night. We need to have peace and quiet in the hallways before 11 p.m. and 8 a.m. and try to keep the noise in the rooms to a minimum. There will be no gambling or sleeping in the hospitality room or other public areas of the hotel. Access to all cabin fever activities require you to wear your name badge. Individuals will be responsible for any damage done to their rooms. Checkout time is 12 noon. Please use the trash cans and ashtrays. No picture taken during meetings, and please ask at other times. In keeping with our traditions and steps of NA, we ask that you use NA language of recovery in all that you say at these meetings. That is, we refer to our disease simply as addiction. We identify as simply an addict. We refer our time in the program as clean time or recovery. This is not done to be different or better than or controversial. This is done because in the first step we have shifted the focus off the specific drug and onto the recovery process, leaving us with the single focus necessary for unity. Any labels which imply more than one disease dilute that focus, and some of the unity called for in the first tradition is lost. In keeping with our 11th tradition, we did not feel it appropriate to invite media attention. However, there is always the possibility that they will show up. If you are approached by a member of the media, please refer them to the registration table. Would Debbie come up and read Who's an Addict?
If you give me a hug, I will.
Oh, okay.
I'm Debbie, and I'm an addict.
Hi, Debbie.
Who is an addict? Most of us do not have to think twice about this question. We know. Our whole life and thinking was centered in drugs in one form or another. The getting and using and finding ways and means to get more. We use to live, and we live to use, and use to live. Very simply, an addict is a man or a woman whose life is controlled by drugs. We are people in the grip of a continuing and progressive illness whose ends are always the same. Jails, institutions, and death.
Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie.
Would Toby come up and tell us why we're here? Okay.
My name's Toby. I'm an addict.
Hi, Toby.
And I'll take that hug too. Why are we here? Before coming to the fellowship of NA, we cannot manage our own lives, cannot live and enjoy life as other people do. We had to have something different. We thought we'd found it in drugs. We placed their use ahead of the welfare of our families, our wives, husbands, and our children. We had to have drugs at all costs. We did many people great harm, but most of all, we harmed ourselves. Through our inability to accept personal responsibilities, we're actually creating our own problems. We seem to be incapable of facing life on its own terms. Most of us realize that in our addiction we are slowly committing suicide, but addiction is such a cunning enemy of life, we've lost the power to do anything about it. Many of us ended up in jail or sought help through medicine, religion, and psychiatry. None of these methods was sufficient for us. Our disease always resurfaced. We continued to progress until in desperation we sought help from each other in Narcotics Anonymous. After coming to NA, we realized we were sick people. Sick. We suffer from a disease from which there is no known cure. It can, however, be arrested at some point, and recovery is then possible.
Thanks, Tony. Would Diane please come up and tell us how it works?
Hi, I'm Diane. I'm an addict.
Hi, Diane.
If you want what we have to offer and are willing to make the efforts to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. These are the principles that made our recovery possible. 1, we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, we humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, we continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to addicts and to practice these principles in all our fare. This sounds like a big order. We can't do it all at once. We didn't become addicted in one day, so remember, easy does it. There's one thing more than anything else that will defeat us in our recovery. This is an attitude of indifference or intolerance towards spiritual principles. 3 of these that are indispensable are honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. With these, we are well on our way. We feel that our approach to the disease of addiction is completely realistic for the therapeutic value of one addict helping another without parallel. We feel that our way is practical, for one addict can best understand and help another addict. We believe that the sooner we face our problems within our society and everyday living, just that much faster do we become acceptable, responsible, and productive members of that society. The only way to keep from returning to active addiction is not to take that first drug. If you're like us, you know that 1 is too many and 1,000 is never enough. We put great emphasis on this, for we know that when we use drugs in any form or substitute one for another, we release our addiction all over again. Thinking of alcohol as different from other drugs has caused a great many addicts to relapse. Before we came to NA, many of us viewed alcohol separately, but we cannot afford to be confused about this. Alcohol is a drug. We are people with the disease of addiction who must abstain from all drugs in order to recover.
Thanks. Hello, my name is Rosie. I'm an addict. We have 2 speakers here today, and I would like to call Jan B. to come up and tell us her story thing.
Yay, Jan!
Hi, I'm Jan. I'm an addict.
Hi, Jan.
Welcome to Cabin Fever. Yeah. Isn't this just awesome? I swear this convention grows more. Every year I come, it's bigger. This is, what is this? How to walk on the spiritual side. You know, I didn't know until I got here yesterday what I was going to speak on. I knew they had asked me to share. And I'm like, oh my God, how to walk on the spiritual side. You know, how do I do that? Well, first I have to know what spiritual is. And so, of course, I pulled out my basic text and I go to the index. And it tells me under spirituality, I expected, you know, to have all these page numbers, and it doesn't. It has acceptance, faith, giving, how, honest, open, and willing, hope, humility, love, service, surrender, and tolerance, and then all the page numbers. And it's like, those are all spiritual principles. You know, every one of those is a spiritual principle. And then as a subheading under all that, it's got spiritual awakenings, which is the first one, my favorite. Spiritual awareness, spiritual condition, spiritual direction, spiritual experience, spiritual growth, spiritual ideas, spiritual living, spiritual maintenance, spiritual matters, spiritual principles, spiritual program, spiritual values. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't use any of that. We'd be here a week, you know? And so I picked out my favorite one,
and that's Spiritual Awakenings. And I don't need to look in a book for Spiritual Awakenings. And the other one was Spiritual Living, and it only had 2 page numbers. And I'm going to read you a paragraph. It's on page 94 under Living just for today, Living the Program. And I've already got it underlined from a previous step study, or book study. In living the steps, we begin to let go of our self-obsession. We ask a higher power to remove our fear of facing ourselves in life. We redefine ourselves by working the steps and using the tools of recovery. We see ourselves differently. Our personalities change. We become feeling people capable of responding appropriately to life. We put spiritual living first and learn to use patience, tolerance, and humility in all our daily affairs. And to me, that's how you walk a spiritual path. That's how you live a spiritual life. We change. Because when we first got here, face it, none of us were very spiritual. I know I wasn't. The only thing I knew about spirituality was that it existed, that there was a God. I had a mother-in-law who was a very spiritual person. I feel like my mother is a very spiritual person, but I don't know how they got there. I didn't understand how they achieved that. And today I know how they achieved that. And it's what I am striving to achieve myself today. And that's to remain open to a new idea and to change my old way of thinking. And the only way I've ever learned how to do that is through following this program and working these steps. And that's what the basic text tells me. That's what all of our literature tells me, that if I want to change my old ways, I have to work the steps and follow the spiritual principles and apply them in my life. And for me, I think I really started doing that when I started recognizing my spiritual awakenings. When they happened in my life, I was open enough to recognize them and willing enough to accept them and honest enough to know that they happened. And I want to share a couple of those with you. I've had several, and some of them, I may cry. I'm a tearful person, and just, yeah, thank you. Just be prepared. One of the first ones I remember having a spiritual awakening was when I was still using. And my dad died when I was 17. And we had had a very rocky relationship from the time I went through puberty on. And at 17, I don't know if it was because he was finally accepting that he had a daughter, or if I was finally accepting that he wasn't the big bad wolf and that this man was pretty cool. I don't know which one of us was growing up, but maybe we were both growing up together, but we were finally starting to get along. And then my dad died of a heart attack. And I remember crying in my bedroom. It was raining, and I was beating on the window, and I was talking to God. And I said, why did you take him now when I have finally started to like this man? Why did you take him now? And I heard a voice. And this voice said, because I need him more than you do, you will be okay. And it was like, everything's all right then. You know, this peace came over me. I was no longer angry. I was still sad. Yes, I was still upset. But I wasn't mad at my higher power because I knew I was going to be okay. That was such an eye-opening experience for me because I never had anything like that ever happen to me before, ever. And then after I quit using, of course, and you're more receptive to things that happen around you when you're not in a fog, I can remember once, I love animals, and I had taken in a stray cat. And this cat had been abused apparently or something, because it was not a typical cat that would rub up against you and want to sit on your lap and purr and, you know, all this stuff. This cat hid all day long in my closet and only came out to eat at night when the house was quiet and everybody was in bed. And we soon realized that she was going to have kittens. And so she had this litter of kittens in my closet, and still wouldn't let anybody touch them, wouldn't let anybody around her. I mean, she would just attack you. And I remember I'm working on, I think it was my fourth step. Anyway, I'm working with my relationship with my dad. And through this work, I realized I had never told my dad I loved him. Never. Before he died, did I ever remember telling this man that I loved him. And so, you know, you get new in recovery and you don't have anything to anesthetize all these feelings. You know, I'm just bawling in my bed, writing, journaling, writing this stuff. And this cat, of course, is in the closet, and who knows where my children are, but this cat jumps on the foot of the bed. And I remember the cat being there, but I'm crying and I'm talking to my higher power, how, you know, I can't believe that I lived for 17 years with this man and I never ever told him that I loved him. Never ever said the words out loud to him. And, you know, and so I'm just bawling, and the next thing I know, this cat is on my chest licking my tears. This is the cat that wouldn't even let you touch her. And it has come to comfort me. And I'm still crying, and I'm consciously, you know, their little tongues are rough, and I'm trying to push this little cat away. You know, I'm trying to push this cat away, and it was like, and I just grabbed this cat's face, and I talked to it, and I said, my father will never hear me say those words. He will never know that I loved him so much and was never able to tell him. And I heard this voice looking in this cat's eyes, and this voice said, he knows. He has always known, and he loves you too. That is a spiritual awakening. I'm sorry, folks, it is. And I knew I'd cry. That opened my heart to be aware that there is a higher power working in my life today, and that the Spirit lives on. The Spirit lives on. And when my son was born, the last thing I ever said to my dad was that, you know, being the cocky teenager that I was, and of course we were going out drinking, and it was April, and he said, you all be careful, there's a tornado watch out. And I said, oh, Pop, if I'm not, I'll name it after you. Well, he died that night. So when my son was born, I named him after my dad. And I remember he was days old, and I went to my dad's grave, and I said, here is your grandson. This is your first grandson. I wish you could see him. And again, I heard a voice that says, he does. He can see him. He knows. You know, to me, that is the spirituality that I have today. I am open-minded enough to allow that to happen. I keep my mind open for the possibility that my God is going to talk through you people and through other people and enhance my spirit. I also had a spiritual awakening. I was working on 6th to 7th step, and I was at Campvention. Anybody been to Campvention? Yeah. And I'm walking down the sidewalk, and there's a dance going on, and I'm going down to the dance. And I had written on this step during the day, and it would have been a beautiful day, nice outside. And I'm walking down the sidewalk, and there's a street light, you know, the street lights that, if anybody's been there, it's out in the country. And there's street lights that light up the sidewalk at night. And I'm walking in between these street lights, and I have two shadows, you know, because of the way the light falls. There's two of me, you know, from my feet, and it splits. And then as I keep walking, my shadows join, and I'm one again. And it was like, this is what the 6th step is about. My character defects, my spirituality, where I'm at, and what I want to become, where I want to go. And that's what the program has given me, is that I can be here, but I can be here if I just work the steps, continue to grow, continue to live the spiritual principles that I know, honesty, tolerance, open-mindedness, willingness, that I'll get here. I just need to keep walking, and I'll be this person. That's a spiritual awakening. To me, that's living the spiritual life. I may not feel very tolerant some days. Oh, some days I'm so negative. And I have to remind myself, stay positive. You'll get there. Stay positive and you'll be the person you want to be. Stay open-minded, stay willing. Yes, some days it hurts like hell to be a recovering addict and have to walk up to somebody and say, I'm sorry, I was an asshole. I shouldn't have said that. I apologize if I hurt your feelings. It really hurts someday to have to humble myself to do those things. But I have to, because I want to be that person. I want to be that spiritual person. I want to be that spiritual being, and I want to change. I don't want to live in that chaos anymore. That chaos is not spiritual for me today. It's really not. I know that for me, I think spirituality, walking and living a spiritual life, mainly is staying positive, living in the positive part of life. Yeah, problems happen. I mean, life happens. You know, it's kind of like the meditation reading today. Life happens to us. And it is my job to find a solution to my problems that is positive and spiritual-based, spiritual principles-based, and go there and do that. And, you know, I try to do that today. I'm not perfect, you know. I think a guru, isn't a guru somebody who's seeking enlightenment, not somebody who is enlightened, but somebody who's seeking enlightenment? That's what I want to be today. I want to be a spiritual guru. I want to be somebody who searches for that spiritual enlightenment. I don't want to be the person that sits back and says, oh, she's full of shit. You know, oh, that's a bunch of bull. No, I want to be the person who can believe it, who can feel it, who can know it, and who can share it. So somebody else can say, oh, you mean that was what that was? A member of my home group told a newcomer that if she didn't know she was having a spiritual awakening, then it wasn't happening. If she had to ask her sponsor if that was a spiritual awakening, it wasn't happening. And she called me and she was really, really upset. And I said, it's your program, it's your life, it's your feelings. Do you think you had a spiritual awakening? Do you feel like the light bulb went off? Did you feel something happen in your heart, in your spirit? She said, yes. I said, then you had a spiritual awakening. How many of them have you had? And she said, I think this is the first one. I said, well, there you go. Then you probably didn't know you were having one. You have to experience and know what it is to know what you had. A lot of us are like that. We don't know what we've got, what we had until it was gone. And I didn't know it happened to me until it happened to me, and I was able to recognize it. And yeah, some people had to point stuff out to me. I'm sorry, I'm an addict. I'm not the smartest whip in the, what is that, the sharpest rock in the creek or whatever, you know? Sometimes you have to tell me things, you know? And I have Teflon brain too. You know, it sticks for a second and then whoop, it's gone, you know? So you have to tell me things over and over and over and over again. It took me months, probably even years, to learn the readings. And I heard them 4 or 5 times a week, you know? I have to hear things over and over and over again. That's why I keep coming back. That's why I keep coming to conventions. That's why I keep searching. Because I know I'm never going to be complete. I know there's always going to be room for improvement, always room for growth. And that's what I want to keep doing. I want to keep getting better. I don't want to ever get ripe and rotten. I want to keep growing. And that's all I got, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Jan. I also have another speaker. His name is Mike Q. Would you please come up here?
I'm gonna have to stand. Wow. I'm Mike, I'm an addict. And it's good to be here. Usually need to take a minute or two here. I got a call a couple of weeks ago from a guy named Ralph. I don't know him. And he asked me to if I would like to do a workshop here. And we talked, and I said, oh, sure, I'd be thrilled, I'd be honored, you know. all of that. And we got to talking. I thought I knew who he was, but after we talked for a little while, I realized I didn't know who he was. I thought he was another Ralph. I know a couple of Ralphs. And then right before I hung up the phone, I asked him what the topic was. And he said, how to walk on the spiritual side. And I said, oh. And I hung up the phone. And I said, somebody set me up. And, that was my first instinct, and, but I got to thinking about it, and I got to examining that idea, and, it just kind of caught me off guard, and I took that look at it, and, I look at myself as, I don't really necessarily look at myself as a spiritual person, I look at myself as a person who, as an addict, and a person with the disease of addiction and all the symptoms that go along with that, I look at that type of person and, walking the spiritual side as some kind of contradiction. That is not really, well, I do know that, that if anybody can do that or even strive to do that is a miracle. And I do look at it that way. When I came to Narcotics Anonymous, somebody said, I don't remember, it was early on, and somebody said, I remember them pointing to the wall and saying, to the steps and saying, you have to incorporate these spiritual principles into your life. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I could understand what he was saying, but to understand what he was talking about and how that would work, I could remember thinking, okay, maybe. At that point, I think I was just kind of going along with things. And, I'm gonna jump around here a little bit, I'm sure. I'm a little nervous, but, like I said, it feels good to be here, and all of that. I went to my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting, I think it was towards the end of 1987, maybe the beginning of 1988, and it was in San Diego. I lived in San Diego at the time, and I had lived there for about 5 years, so I slid into some bottoms while I was out there. And I went to a meeting in Narcotics Anonymous, and it just didn't really take, I went to a couple of meetings, and I kept using, and that same year, 1988, I moved back to Kansas City, and within a couple of months, I was back at Narcotics Anonymous. I don't know why. I know I was in pain. I know I was hurting. I know I knew what that Narcotics Anonymous thing was. I didn't really know what it was, but I knew I could call this number and I would get somebody, and that's what happened. And I called, and a guy named Ernie answered the phone, and he talked me into coming to a narcotics. And I called for help, but I was reluctant to accept the help. I had reservations, the alcohol thing, and why I would, whatever I was manifesting in my mind to rationalize whatever. I ended up going to the meeting, and I went to that meeting, and I remember sitting in that meeting with about 8 other men, and 2 guys came up to me after the meeting who had, I learned later that one had about 30 days clean and another one had about 2 weeks clean, and they were hot on this thing, whatever it was. And they came up to me, they intercepted me, and they said, keep coming back no matter what. Okay? You know, it's like the first time I ever heard that, keep coming back. And the other one said, I remember, he said, keep coming back even if you use, keep coming back. And they drilled me for, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes. And I did just that. I used and I kept coming back, and I used and I kept coming back. And that went on for a while. And finally, one day, after a good run, I called my sponsor, who I had had for a couple of months in this program now. And I called him up. His name was Bill. And I said, Bill, I don't think this is going to work for me. And I don't think, maybe I need to go to treatment. Maybe I need to go to a halfway house. All the things that I hadn't tried yet. Maybe I need to go to a psychiatrist. I didn't go through all those things. I just ended up in Narcotics Anonymous somehow. And basically what he told me, and it's kind of funny because I was in that workshop earlier about old timers and newcomers, and I thought about bringing this up, but somehow I didn't. But what happened was I was trying to tell him how I was going to get clean. And he told me so. And he ran me upside the other, and about all the suggestions that we have about sponsorship and triggers and meetings and 90 meetings in 90 days, and that I wasn't doing these things, people, places, things, all that. And I went to a meeting that day at noon, and I said, okay, that's it. And I was sitting in this first step meeting, and I said, I surrender, this is it. And as soon as I was saying it, and I'm going to do 90 meetings in 90 days, as soon as I said that, I knew, I was like, what the fuck am I saying? I'd said this 1,000 times before. What was different about it this time? But I said it, and I meant it, and I was in pain, and I was sick, and I was tired, and I didn't understand what surrender meant, even when I did it, even when I surrendered. I really didn't understand it. And every day that went by, every day, I just held on and held on. I kept waiting for that other shoe to drop. I remember getting 30 days, because if they had 7-day key tags, they'd have a whole string of them. And I remember getting that 30-day tag. I still have my 30-day tag. I have every tag thereafter. And it does mean something to me. But, what I'm saying here is what has helped me the most, and it's in our literature, and it says the number one, I don't know the exact quote, so I'm not good at that, but the major stumbling block in our life, surrender, is now the cornerstone of our recovery. And I am very grateful, I'm going to talk about that, and I'm very grateful that I understand the process of surrender. For me, when I looked at this and I thought about the topic and everything, the only thing that I could really come up with was what I understand to be the spiritual principles of this program. And not that I have it down, because I don't. I have some home group members here that know me. And, I don't claim to be, any type of spiritual situation. But I am an addict, okay? And I understand from the first step that I have the disease of addiction. That's what I didn't understand. I didn't understand that. I thought I had a Coke problem or a alcohol problem or whatever. You know, I didn't know what addiction was, so how could I understand that? When I came into these rooms, I started to understand, and I started to become aware of what it is that I'd been doing for the last 20 years. You know, I became aware of the damage that I was doing, and by doing that, I was coming out of denial. Okay? When I came into Narcotics Anonymous and I surrendered in that process somewhere, and it talks about this in our literature, that was the most, or probably not the most, but the first time in recovery that I got honest. When I came in here and I admitted that I was powerless over my addiction, and then I understood and I started to understand what my addiction was. And the spiritual core of my disease is my self-centeredness, my selfishness, my denial. And this is what kept me blind for so many years. This is what allowed me to rationalize my behavior, my active addiction. And once I started to understand that, I was aware. I was aware that there was something there that I couldn't control. And to understand that was like a freedom. For me, being the addict that has to examine everything to death, that made sense to me. And all the years up to that point, I kept trying this, I kept trying that, doing it my way. Didn't even entertain the idea of asking for help until I walked into a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. That was like that little ray of hope for me. On my first meeting, when I left there, and that little ray of hope that they talk about for me was somebody said, you can't do it by yourself. Because that clicked for me. And I said to myself, that's what I've been doing. I have been trying to do this all by myself forever. So that awareness and that understanding is what I understand to be a big part of this process of surrender. And from there, I became willing. From there, I really started to accept what I was. I was an addict. I started to accept what you were telling me. I started to quit fighting it. I started to, quit rationalizing it. I started to accept that I was an addict, and all these things that was being pointed out to me were true. And I became willing, and that's what was different. And I surrendered to that fact. I surrendered to the fact that I was an addict, and there was nothing that I could do to change that. That I had this disease of addiction, and however long I stayed clean, that wasn't going to change. I knew there was a place in the road that I could go this way and continue to live the way our book talks about, as far as trying to just maintain through life and through jails and institutions or what have you, or to go this other way. And I was there. I was at that fork in the road. But through all of that came the willingness. And with willingness, I was willing to take action. So I was willing to do the 90 meetings in 90 days, go to any lengths, do whatever it takes, talk to my sponsor, empower my sponsor to tell me what to do. Take the position that my best thinking got me here. Anything that I could do, say or do, I needed some backup on that. And, I'm spending a little time on this, but, the concept of that is what gets me through. Those principles there get me through my life. And the more I apply myself in that way, in my personal recovery, the better my life is. I just celebrated back in November 18th, 1988. It's my clean time. I just celebrated 15 years clean. And all year, you know, it's one of those things I'm reflecting, you know, this is 15 years, you know, that kind of thing, whatever. And, you know, this last year was not my most spiritual year. You know, that's one of the things that I concluded, you know, when I, got to my anniversary date, my birthday, is that this has not been my most spiritual year. I have had better years. Maybe when I had 6 years, maybe when I had 9 or 12. What I'm saying is, for me, it just, each year doesn't mean you get more spiritual. It just doesn't grow that way. I have to maintain and I have to keep my place in a spiritual conditioning. Okay? And the more I do that, we all have heard this before, that everything in the world can be going great for you, your job, your relationships, everything else, and you feel like shit. Okay? And then on the other side, everything can be falling down around you, and you feel good. Because you're working a program. And I want to be in that place. Because I understand the process that I go in and out of that. And if I can maintain some type of centeredness, God-centeredness, some type of spiritual centeredness, program-related centeredness, that's when I feel the best. And I can drift in and out of that. I was talking to a sponsee the other day, and he's on the second step. And he's been around a while, but he's been giving it a little bit more lately. It's kind of one of those things. I remember at certain times of my recovery that I didn't feel like I was growing enough. I didn't feel that I was where I needed to be, or I had wasted time in my recovery. And, but it's kind of like when I first got clean. It's the same thing. When I got to step 2, we were talking, and we just happened to mention the relating to the movie, and he says, I should have took the blue pill instead of the red pill. Because there's no turning back now. I can't go back to where I was. Doesn't work. So anyway, this last year for me has been pretty trying. Just a couple of things. I'm in the same business that I've been in for about 25 years, but we started a side business, or it was a major project about 6 years ago, and all of that, and it just came to the last year or two was just like trying to save a sinking ship. So we really finally let go and surrendered and decided to let it go. But it was very demanding, and very stressful. I met some new people last year. And I think if anybody met me last year, they really don't know me, because they met a different person, okay? And I knew it. I knew my character defects were flourishing. I knew my character defects were out there. My patience was not good. And patience, little thing on patience, I'm a very patient person. I can sit and wait and just wait for things to happen and to manifest and to change and all of that. Seriously, I'm that type of person. I can do that for a week, a year, 3 years. I can be very patient at some things. But if I can't get, like, my house key in the fucking door, okay? That's a character defect of mine that I don't think is ever going to go away. Or, even if I'm ready, somebody else doesn't think so. But that's just how it is for me. The principles to me of the program, and again, I don't claim to have a lock on it. It's an effort. One of the things is the process. In this other meeting, they were talking about meeting etiquette and working steps and newcomer, old timer, all that kind of stuff, and it was an interesting workshop. But for me, I can go to a meeting today, and I go to a meeting, I'm in a place up here. I go to a meeting, get there a little early for the most part. If I'm late, it's not because I'm hanging out back, it's because I got there late and I'm 5 minutes late or whatever. But most part, I'm there, and I sit in the meeting, and I'm on automatic pilot. I mean, I'm there. Whether I like what you're saying or I don't like what you're saying is really not an issue to me anymore. It used to be more often than not, there was people that would talk, and, it'd be like, shit, all of those things, and, I just go. I just do some of the things, I go through the motions a lot of times, okay? And what I'm saying is, I think we have to condition ourselves to go to meetings, to really get what they mean, to work steps, to utilize and work with your sponsor. We don't come in here knowing how to do those things. And it takes, when I came in, they said, do this to the best of your ability. And I did it to the best of my ability. I had a sponsor, and I worked through the first 12 steps in the first year. I don't know if that's, a long time or a short time or whatever. It seemed like okay, and that's what my sponsor had me doing. There was no step guides. There was no anything but a basic text and all of that. And, we talked and we wrote a little bit on certain steps, and, some people wrote more than others, and I got through the steps, and I did a 4th step, and I did it to the best of my ability. But I really realized several years later, 3 or 4 years later, that the best of my ability at 4 years in recovery or 5 years in recovery was a lot different than the best of my ability in 1 year in recovery. And when I did a 4th step again in my 4th year, it was like night and day. And that's not to say that my first 4th step, or the first time I went through the steps, was the best of my ability. It changed my life. It set me on a path of recovery in this program. But I learned a lot in that next time around, and I learned a lot. Nowadays, it takes me like 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year sometimes to work a step. And it's not that I go hurry up and work a step. It's part of my regular deal. I learned something about all of that. I learned something about recovery despite the pain and the pain. Like a lot of people, I used to run physically, emotionally, spiritually, I would imagine. I used to run from everything. And I used to camouflage everything. And I used to mask everything. And what I found out was, over the years of different situations, life on life terms happening, that I was going to go through that anyway. Okay? Why am I rushing? Because they always told me, no pain, no gain. When you're in the middle of that pain and somebody says, this too will pass. And your reaction is like, fuck you. right? Leave me alone. Talk to me tomorrow. You know, we've all been there. We're in the middle of the woods. We're coming out of the woods, whatever, going into the woods. You know, whenever I've gone through these things, I always come out of it. I always come out of it as a better person. I always come out of it as I learned something. I got something from this. So I got to thinking, if I get so much out of this, looking back through all the woods that I just went through, why am I running? Why am I rushing it? Why am I dodging it and going around it and hiding and everything else? Why don't I just go through it? Why don't I just go through it and feel the pain? As long as I just don't go out creating pain, you know. You know, the word humble, I guess I misunderstood that for a while because I used to run from that and hide from that or think I wasn't humble or I didn't have any humility. But, you know, the way Narcotics Anonymous explains humility is that we have a total awareness of ourselves and who we are, a realistic view of who we are. I don't have to walk around like this, you know, bowing my head and, you know, doing all of that or, you know, being this ray of light or whatever, you know, because I certainly am not. But I do have a much better understanding of who I am. I know what my assets are, a lot of them. I don't know what all of them are. I know what my liabilities are. I know what my character defects are. Sometimes I know them and sometimes I don't. Sometimes you point them out to me. Some of you know them more than others. But I know where I'm at. I'm right where I'm supposed to be today. And I hear people say, I hate that. I hate that term, you know. And, to me, it makes so much sense today. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. It has a lot to do with acceptance. It has a lot to do with humility. It has a lot to do with the process. See, what I've learned to do for me in Narcotics Anonymous is trust the process of recovery. When I got to that second step, it said, we came to believe. And when I stepped from step one into I came to believe, into step two, you know, there was an understanding there. You know, through the process of step one, through the process of surrender, through the process of acceptance and willingness, I had started the process of coming to believe. And over and over and over again through the steps, it repeats that. Surrender. And the process of surrender comes over and over. When I battle with my higher power, when I battle with issues that I have to turn over, when I battle with resentments, with people. You know, in the 8th step, it's the same thing. We became willing. That's a process. And I got to be careful because I got to try and take some type of humble approach to this, because if I'm not careful, I can insist my views on you, and that's when I fall into self-righteousness. I read that last night. And I've fallen into self-righteousness before in my time in recovery. And I don't like going there. I don't like, it's a character defect, you know. And, we're running out of time, so I'm going to say one or two more things. I mentioned sponsorship. And, you know, I love my sponsor. He's here today. I've had 3 sponsors since I've been clean. I had a sponsor for 4 years, I had a sponsor for 9 years, and I've had my sponsor now for 2 years. And I'll tell you what, I wish the fuck he'd call me back more often. That's just a joke. But, you know, when we're doing our deal and we're working our program and I'm doing my part with my people that I sponsor and they're doing their part and I'm doing my part with my sponsor and he's doing his part, I have had in my life no better relationship, me personally. I have never had a better relationship than the relationships I've had with my sponsors. You know, I'm not married, so I can't say that. I was married. It was prior to recovery. I have a daughter. One of the things this last year, my daughter came to me last April, and she said, "Dad, I'm pregnant." And she's 18, and she was still in high school. She graduated, pregnant, and, you know, I had a lot of things going on last year that I just really haven't gotten into, but there was a lot going on, and that was one of them. Okay, and you know, surrender, you know, acceptance, a process. I wanted to kill him. Okay, when I got through with it all, I said, at least she's not 14, because ever since she was 14, I was waiting for it. Okay, I was waiting for it at 15 and 16. And, you know, relationships for me have not been, I've had a lot of relationships in recovery, in the rooms of recovery, and outside of the rooms in recovery. In the last 15 years, it's a long time. I've had some good, loving relationships, and some not so, but I'll tell you what, nothing like the ones I used to have in prior to my marriage was like we'd get up in the morning and hi honey, fuck you, well, you look pretty shitty today, what's your problem? And you know, one would make a false move and get, you know, I was usually the one that got hit with like a 3-pound ashtray or something like that in the head. So you know, that's, you know, love. That's what I understood, and I loved her. And when I came into recovery, I learned that my sponsor says, "Mike, that's not love." So I said, okay, I know what I don't want. When I came to recovery, I know what I don't want. But one last thing, anonymity, they say, it says, spiritual foundation. You know, when I was in San Diego, it's going to take a little longer. When I was in San Diego, I had, you know, it was a privilege, what have you, to go to the World Convention last year in San Diego. So I haven't been there in 15 years. So I'm thinking, you know, all these years, it's been like, man, you know, I lived on the beach, I did this, it was a nice place. I'm originally from Los Angeles, but, you know, when I moved here, it was because we split up and my daughter was here with her mother and all of that. So the point is, I was going back to where it all began for me, to my first place of Narcotics Anonymous. That's really what was exciting to me, was going back to that. And I went back to the convention. I had a great time. It was a good convention. And I went back to the town where I went to my first meeting, the one I explained earlier. And that was like a full cycle thing. It was like kind of a spiritual part of my walk, okay? But also, see, the meeting that I went to was in Oceanside, which is about 25 miles north of San Diego. And in our traditions. I just want to bring this up. It says the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop using. And for the most part, it says it in our literature that it's really set to address the most obvious symptom, and that's drugs. The most obvious symptom of our disease was our drug use. And we certainly learned that it was much more than that when we got here. But that's what got us here. And it says also in the third tradition that the newcomer has to be able to identify when they come here. So I'm going to give you a little identification. We're driving to the meeting, okay? And as we're driving north on Interstate 5, I see an exit. And all of a sudden it flashes back to me. This exit is where I used to get off at the middle of the night as I was hitting that pipe, and I would pull into the emergency room or the emergency exit, hyperventilating, sweating, ready to pass out, and saying to myself, if something happens, I could fall out of the car and somebody will come and get me. And it never happened. And I take another hit and I get back on the interstate. And there's a second exit 10 miles up with another hospital. And I would do the same thing. And I had forgotten this because I had done many things like this in that area, okay? But I did that repeatedly, sometimes night after night on those runs, okay? And I can sometimes still feel it today when that's going on. 2 or 3 days before I called Narcotics Anonymous for the first time, I was laying on the floor in the bathroom. I had vomit all over my arms, and I had shit in my pants, and I was emotionally, I don't know where I was. But somewhere in there, a day or two later, I called, actually this is what happened. I opened up the yellow pages looking for help. I didn't know what kind of help to get. I didn't know about treatment programs, and I knew about the law, and I didn't want to get caught. I knew about my job. I didn't want to get caught. I knew about my family. I didn't want to get caught. I did a pretty good job of hiding my addiction. And I called that actually what happened is I looked in here, and there was these display ads of treatment programs and other medical services and so forth. And I called them, and they wanted cash. They wanted insurance, and I didn't have all that. And I saw this one little line that said Narcotics Anonymous. And I didn't know about Narcotics Anonymous, but I understood what it meant, you know, probably from the other fellowship. The anonymous thing is what drew me. And I called the phone line. They were talking clean and all that shit. I didn't know what they were talking about using. And I went to that meeting, okay? And it talks about in our literature that we're anonymous, you know, and we're nameless. There's a reason for that. We're nameless. I came down here with 2 other guys, and one guy made the room reservation. I checking in. They said, "Who's the name?" I don't know. Jason. I don't know. You got a 12-step convention going on there. But you know, the thing is, we can sit in a room with, you know, construction workers or attorneys or business people or homemakers or people who have money and people who have nothing, and who are in poverty. And we have, and that is stripped away. So that what we have is one thing in common, and that's our disease, and that's addiction. And because of that, we feel a part of, and we become a part of. And that's all I got. Thanks for letting me share.
Thanks to everyone who read and spoke today. May we circle up?
Can I stand next to you, Rosie?
Oh, sure.
I don't know if we're going to be able to go all the way around.
I don't think so either.
We might need to, I don't know, we'll figure it out.
You guys made it down.
We're gonna have to come this way.
Oh, this isn't gonna work. Y'all come this way.
Doesn't it make you feel
Oh,
proud
come
that
on.
our
Yeah,
group's
come
putting this
on.
on?
Fall in on us. Come this way. Come through the middle. Take a walk on the wild side. We're comfortable.
We can't scoot up anymore here.
Uh-oh, we got
Here we go. We got it.
Yay!
After a moment of silence for the addict who's still suffering and for the babies who will not benefit for life except provide this program with their families, we ask that you say the Serenity Prayer, the V version. Thank you. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We come back.
Y'all can do that one,
Stick around. If it got worse, we wouldn't be here.
Time for that smoke.
Hey, Toby, if you make that, if we get your phone to start dialing out, Mike and I'll put you in the shit.
Do what?
We'll start dialing that phone out, Mike and I'll put you in the shit. There's something been going on. Mike,
I'm on a spiritual cloud right now. So good. I got my 3 years yesterday, so I'm like,
Oh, I don't go up there. I can't stand it for whole days. It's bad. It's nasty. You are, thank you.
I had the same moment. But yeah, same shit.
You got the same 3 times.
Yeah, I did a couple of years.